Happy New Year, everyone. I know I'm a bit late, like a month and a half, but my capture footage had a bit of a freak accident last month, and I was so busy working on last month's models that I just completely spaced and forgot to try again. This month has also been just like really busy and hectic for me so far, which is why I didn't get anything out sooner. Oops, I'm sorry. Just a tiny little bit of housekeeping ahead of the project proper. As you can see here, I've traded in my basic bitch workspace and illustrated avatar for something hopefully a little bit more fun and expressive. I spent maybe a week working on this model from concept design to finished VTuber. For the most part, I'm really happy with this outcome. I think it's going to add a bit more flair to these videos. I've also revamped my Patreon rewards tiers. Last year was my experimental phase where I just kind of threw all of my skill sets at the wall to see what would stick. I'm afraid to say that the fonts and the brushes simply did not stick. As a result of this decision, I've had to do a bit of tier maintenance, but here's the main gist. You can sign up for the purely updates tier just to find out what I'm up to, see my works in progress, get some occasional small rewards. If I feel like making like a font for that month, get the videos early. Next, there are two separate tiers for 3D models, the animation ready tier and the 3D print ready tier. Animation Ready has models optimized for animation with rigging, weight painting, and hand-painted textures, while 3D Print Ready has posed models fully prepared for 3D printing. If you want access to both kinds of models, there's a tier for that too. I've kept the pricing pretty much the same, so no one suddenly gets a stupid high charge that they didn't know about. Now, since February is the month of love or whatever, I wanted to immerse myself in some romantic, baroque character designs. I can think of no one who fits this description better than the Japanese illustrator Sakizo. Her work is intricately detailed, huge, and gorgeous without losing the silhouette of a given work. I wanted to challenge myself this month to work with existing designs from another person's catalog to play more within the space of interpretation as opposed to fabrication. I also wanted to really emphasize clothing and hair rigging this month as a part of my projects. So the armatures this month are going to look really wild, but they give you a whole lot of control for posing. This month I've modeled these two designs by the illustrator and rendered them in a style that I adapted from the original works, which can be found in the Engraved Witch in a Fantasy World and Mystic Animism art books. I decided on these two character designs because they're really similar, so I can just use the same base model twice and just really hone in on the modeling, texturing, and rigging for her different outfit sets and props. The original plan was to do a time-lapse for the first model that I finished this month, the Archer X Fire Element character from Engraved Witch in a Fantasy World, but due to my own stupidity and some storage space issues, the footage ended up being corrupted and completely unusable. It's a bit of a bummer that you guys won't be getting the full 3D character fabrication experience, but I'm hoping a deeper dive into my rigging and texturing processes will make up for it. Anyway, that's enough of the preamble. Let's hop to it. So, the first thing I did was a quick traceover of my original reference image, but just the body and the hair. To be honest, I'm not sure why I bothered doing the face, but sometimes the heart wants what it wants. Let's call it a warm-up or whatever. After that's done, I begin sketching out the elements of the new outfit, referring to the original art off screen and doing my best to keep it accurate while adapting it for the body type that I've sketched. I also diagram out the wing placement on the back so I can get those looking accurate. Okay, well, once I've finished with the sketch, I hopped into Blender and duplicated the scalp section to make it a bit bigger for all the extra stuff that's going to go onto it. I don't really enjoy making wings from scratch, so I grabbed the wings from the headgear on the original and made them bigger with a soft outward sort of slant. After placing the shoulder blade wings, I duplicated these wings twice and placed them roughly in accordance with the reference image, separating them into different vertex groups so I could better grab them as necessary. With the wings all done, I moved on to the first layer of this character's outfit. I couldn't really tell if it was a dress or separates, so I chose the easier option and made it a mini dress, selecting all the faces on the chest and all the way down to the hips before duplicating these and separating them from the original mesh. From there, I closed up the gap between the boobs to make a more convincing top section, moved some edge loops around the back to compensate for her ass cheeks, and evened out the hem as much as I could. Then I selected out the bits I would use to form the corset piece and duplicated them out, forgetting I had like 2 or 3 other skirts to model. Oops. After hiding that, I proceeded with the second sketch in the hierarchy, the long skirt. I simply selected and duplicated all the vertices from the waist to the end of the mini dress except for the first 3 columns at the front of the dress. Duplicated those and separated them from the mini dress object while extending the bottom row of vertices till I reached roughly the ankles of the model and adding a few edge loops for better definition further down the line. With this second skirt done, I repeated the process for the skirt and tassel combo, acting as a third skirt layer, omitting a few columns at the front and selecting up to knee length from the waist. I then duplicated the 2 columns from the long skirt that I neglected previously and did the same with these. They were then attached to the current top skirt object and merged with the top 2 vertices after giving the fabric their distinctive points seen in the reference. It's around here that I started adding solidify modifiers to all my layers so I could see how much more surface area I needed the corset belt to compensate for. Once I finished with that, I played a bit with the shape of the garment. With the fixes done to the corset, I went back into the mini dress and scalloped the bottom hem and extended the collar to give it the high frill neck that you can see in this reference. I do pretty much all the scalloped edges in this project about the same, by subdividing and pulling alternating vertices up or down as necessary. There's a tiny bit of edge loop fixing and shape correction that needs to be done, but it's all pretty straightforward. I duplicate and separate off 1 row of faces for the neck accessory. Once finished with the top foundation, I start shaping the sort of armored hip plating skirt belt thing in the reference by moving a few edges around, selecting all the edges and separating them off from the corset bit. From here, I start on the final skirt layer, the pointy armor bits that come out of the hip bit. I added a mirror modified plane, pull it horizontally so it becomes 2 separate planes, shape it down into a point, and subdivide it twice lengthwise for a more manipulable surface. Then I began scaling down to fit the proportions of the model and duplicate them to go around the waist. This took a bit to get right because I kept leaving them too long and finishing the whole go around before noticing, but I figured out the right length eventually. From there it came time to do the shoes. I actually already had her heels from the former model, so I didn't really need to make them, but it's the same old duplicate operation we've done a bunch of times now. Just grab the 8 faces at the bottom of the heel and extend downwards to make a heeled shoe. I go back into the original base model and duplicate from the mid-thigh to just above the ankle, then join the shoe and the leg sleeve segment objects so I can begin to link most of the back of the ankle together. I only leave the front open so I can give the shoe that front bit that sort of opens up like a sort of lip. Once that's done, I begin grabbing bits for the leg plating and the knee joint. It's pretty much the same old operation here as we've done everywhere else, just duplicating and shaping it to fit our needs. I inset all the faces around the tops of the greaves for a bit of dimensionality, also pushing a bit of detail around the kneecap. To finish out the skirt detail, I added a circle object and cut it in half horizontally, then began adding some faces by extending them inwards. From there, I cut it in half again, lengthwise this time, so I can mirror modify it. From there, I bring it backward and position it around the model's front upper thighs, placing it at the bottom of the 3 tiers of these curved skirt armor pieces. I extend out a lower edge, solidify the pieces, and duplicate it twice, placing each a little higher than the last, making sure the top curve connects the 2 points at the bottom of the battle skirt. With that, I decided to tackle the bit that I thought would annoy me the most, the layered shirt ruffles. I decided to model these instead of just doing a normal map because I figured it would add a lot to the finished piece. I'm doing normal maps for the ruching underneath though, I am not modeling that shit. I achieved these scalloped edges by creating one large bib to go at the bottom using a mirror modified plane. I extruded the scalloped edge outwards for some extra dimension, then duplicated around 2/3 of the bib. I repeated this whole process around 3 more times, trying to keep the model's ruffles accurate to the design. It's not 100% accurate, but I don't hate it. From there, I did her tendrils using the curve method and just shaping them like how they look in the reference image. I don't really have a lot to say about this process. I then went back to the waist-hip area for a final time and did a few final refinements to the proportions, making the hip bits longer and the corset belt shorter. I think doing this really helped get it perfect. For the arms, I duplicated the entire section from the shoulder to each fingertip and scaled along the normals so it just sort of puffed out a bit more. I then removed sections where the poofs would be and extruded those verts horizontally, scaling each time for a big puffy shape. To finish, I added several edge loops to preserve the shape. I then separated out the gauntlets and armbands and added a few extra detail flourishes around the fingers and wrists to finish the arm sections out. With all the clothes done, it's time to finish out with the accessories. I added a circle curve and inflated a tiny bit with a round bevel of 0.03 in the shape tab before immediately converting it to a mesh. I then added a couple simple stars with a mirror mod from the Add Mesh menu and added them around the halo before applying the mirror mod and joining both meshes. I shrank this down to the appropriate height and stuck it somewhere in the mess of hair at the back of the head. Once done with that, I started on her braid by adding in another curve, this time inflating it on the middle verge after adding a round bevel of 0.3. I then duplicate this curve, mirror it on the y-axis, and arrange a smaller y curve in the middle to create the first segment of the braid. Then I converted these curves into a mesh and began to arrange the braid around the back of the head by scaling the mesh down and duplicating the two bigger shapes so they stuck out of the top of her head, going around the perimeter of the scalp and down into the wavy layers. With the braid done, I decided to tackle the neck ruff next. I wasn't really sure how to interpret it, so I went with high lacy collar that attached to the shoulders. I just kind of duplicated an edge from the top around the back of the neck to the front of the shoulders, separated it out, extruded it upwards, and scalped the edge. The last piece I needed to get done was that hair ruffle thing that she has going on. I thought I could find a quicker way to do this using curves, and honestly it didn't seem to go that badly at first, but it simply wasn't working out that way. So I ended up having to use a mirror modified super subdivided plane that I angled and sculpted until it looked right. The final piece of the ruffle bonnet that needed doing was that lace front piece, which was just another scalloped mirror modified plane that I extruded into position. That last bit was like really easy. Now that we're all done with the modeling, let's focus on some bones. Now usually it's not a necessary step, but for more elaborate models like this one that I made this month, I had to put together a very rudimentary rigging diagram so I can break down where all the bone groups, bone chains, and bones would go for easier rigging. I'm going to be working on all of these on the fly, so I color-coded my diagram to keep it organized. The viewport render kind of fucked up my diagram's colors, but they're still close enough to the original that I can still kind of tell them apart. There's about 8 different groups in my diagram, not counting the human meta rig with hair already present that I installed, but several of these bone chains will still be controlled by existing body bones. So to start with, I import my diagram and add a new armature. Any and all new armatures I make will be added to this existing armature. I just like to do it this way so I can keep whole bone groups out of the way. I'm just going through and creating separate floating bones. I find this controls fabric super well. I'm basing a lot of the understanding of fabric animation off of this really good tutorial about skirt rigs that I'll be linking in the iCard above and down below in the description, but my rig works mostly the same. I'm really particular about naming because the symmetrize button cuts all the time you spend on these rigs, especially complicated ones like these, in half. You just have to label any bones that you want to have symmetrical with L or R depending on the side that you're starting with, because then you can just hit the symmetrize button and it gives you the opposite side. I'm also adding a skirt anchor in the middle right around the spinal column, so that when it comes time to merge the armatures, I can link all 4 skirt layers to the bone that I've designated as a root that can then be parented onto a bone in the original armature, essentially working as a full system control while still functioning in tandem with all the other bones. I'm going to be repeating this process several times for each piece of clothing to make sure a piece can move and be posed. I like to approach this kind of rig building like a cosplayer. If you want a wig to swing around and dance, kind of like what I've got going on here with this model, you need to give it a billion different bones and joints and armatures. Like the hair on this would not be able to move, these cuffs wouldn't have any physics. That's all because I've added extra bones to make sure that it works that way. So just look for the parts that will likely bend and stretch and move the most, and stick a bone in it right under the surface of the object. A lot of these bones will be floating in isolation. This is because I find it much easier to weight paint this way, and it just looks cleaner and less cluttered. Although with the armature looking how it does, I don't think I could call it organized either. Once we've merged all these armatures and done parenting, I can parent all objects to the armature using the automatic weight painting option. We're going to be fixing this up in just a second. I'm going to be going into my vertex group panel super duper often to clean up all of the vertex groups of every piece. I will not be recording that because it is painfully boring. I've left one instance of it in just to show you how deeply dull this is to do. You just hop in there and delete every vertex group that is not necessary to the object for control. It takes a long ass time, so if I mention it again, do as it says in the video, just assume that this is what's happening. I know a lot of this is fairly basic information, but I used to have a really hard time with rigs and rigging of any kind, so anything I can do to help make stuff easier for anybody watching, I'm gonna do it, even if it means I'm over-explaining stuff to the point where it's no longer helpful. At least I hope it's still helpful anyway. Shrug. Now for the more technical aspect of this process, weight painting. Since we used automatic weight painting, this means a lot of it is already done for you based on whatever Python algorithms the Blender team came up with. That means that like on a rig like this that's really complicated, it can be a little bit hit or miss. So like we're going to have to proceed with caution a little bit. Much of this is usable, but we are going to have to hop into the weight painting panel manually so that we can like perfectly tweak and edit the influence of each bone as necessary, especially if some of those areas were affected by the vertex cleanup we did earlier. This is all pretty straightforward though. It helps to pose the bones that you're painting, that way you can get a feel for the areas that need work. But in essence, we're just going to be painting the influence of the bones onto the surface or subtracting it if it's in the wrong place. First things first, I add in the reference image. I don't normally do this, but my second monitor's kind of been having problems, so I can't just refer to it off screen like I normally would. This has been a boon in some ways though, as I was able to better understand the textures on her like frilly lace bib thing that she has. From the jump, a lot of the textures on this model were just the skin on the other model because I duplicated a fair number of the pieces from it. I decided on a texture block out of tendrils, velvet, sateen and lace, gold, and wings and worked my way out from there. For a lot of the texture work on this model, I relied heavily on baroque lace brushes that I have installed on Clip Studio Paint, which is my go-to for illustration or more detail-heavy texture work. I spent a lot of time going between Blender and Clip Studio, making sure I got the placement for the patterns right, adding detail and playing with the UVs to make sure everything worked and looked good. I based a lot of the shading on the metal pieces, on both the reference image and the lighting of the scene, to better sell the vibe of both a painted piece and a metallic texture. It's really difficult. I'm not actually gonna be able to go into much detail here. As you can pretty clearly see what's happening on screen, it's just a lot of painting and more painting. So I'm gonna discuss how I set up my textures really quickly instead. I didn't have anybody teaching me this shit, and I didn't find any videos showing me how to do this when I was just starting out. If this helps out any new Blender users out there, I'm glad. This is a deep dive after all. I want it to be helpful for everyone, but especially for beginners who might not know this stuff. A lot of these textures utilize transparency or translucency to help sell the fabric details in question. It's really simple to set this up. You just make sure your texture has transparency or translucency already there, like erase bits that you want to show up as transparent, or use a lower strength brush to achieve translucency. Plug this image into the alpha node of your BSDF, which is what I use for every texture in this model, and then scroll down to the settings drop-down of your textures panel. I usually pick alpha hashed or alpha blend for the blend mode, depending on the effect I want, and alpha clip for the shadows. You can also toy with backface culling here if it's what you need. For this model's textures, I didn't really have time to worry about futzing with sculpture and normal maps, so I decided instead to use the textures I worked on as the normal map and plug them into the displacement node in the output. This is all shader shit that I just learned like a week ago, so I'm getting the hang of it myself, but the gist of it is that I can just kind of fudge the 3D-ness of the textures in question, like a normal map, but I won't have as much control over which things do and don't protrude. There are parts of the model that would have benefited more from normal maps than this displacement technique, but time was kind of the essence and I needed to get this done a little bit quicker. As you can see, like, the textures came out looking really good regardless. I think maybe the metal stuff could have used the normal maps instead of this, but, you know, I didn't have time. It's been a really busy month for me personally, so, just kind of did what I could with the time that I had, and, think it turned out that bad, to be honest. I think a lot of it came out pretty decent. Here's the final image. And that's it for the process for this month. I've had a lot of fun learning new techniques and honing specifically my texturing skills and getting 2 models done that I'm really proud of. I'm especially happy with the rigging work on this one, though it's huge and confusing, and I love how the sateen and the lace textures specifically came out. As a reminder, all of these models are available this month over on Patreon, and I have a separate, shorter video up on there as a Patreon exclusive, dropping tomorrow, going into the process for her scepter, seen in the final render of this piece. I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned a little something from this deeper than normal dive into my process for creating 3D models, and can see ways that you can implement similar techniques into your own creative practice. And if not, I hope you enjoyed getting to hear me waffle on about shit for 45 minutes. For the next video, I have much simpler, much cringier models in mind. By the time next month's video comes out, it'll be almost April, and most chronically online gay art gremlins knows what that means. But for now, thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day, stay frosty, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!